This is Dan Ferrisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. So happy to be joined today by Frank McCormack, who is Vice President of Sales with Lencore. Topic of conversation is, of course, acoustics, sound masking. Lencore is a recognized leader and has been for many years in the category. Hence, we wanted to bring Frank on to talk about some of the latest developments in things like architectural design, sound masking, absorption, blocking, challenges with construction materials, all these things that Lencore really knows a lot about, knows a whole lot about, in fact. So, Frank, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate what I'm sure is going to be a fantastic dialogue.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, Dan. Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the conversation. Absolutely.
Always happy to host you. So let's get started. As I said, we're going to be talking about acoustics a little bit, and I'd like to know what you would say acoustics means definitionally in the context of architectural design. Why is acoustics such a critical, but actually often overlooked component when it comes to workplace design?
Yeah, good question. Kind of two parts to the question. So in terms of design, we typically think of acoustics in terms of what we define as the ABCs: absorption, blocking, and coverage. So absorption would obviously be things like materials like ceiling tile, carpeting, where they're absorptive and they're going to help address problems with and issues with acoustics. Blocking would be again, walls, partitions that block sound, that can be obtrusive. And then last, the C of the ABCs is coverage, and that's where sound masking comes in. Sound masking is actually going to be introduced typically in the ceiling through speakers to create an ambient background sound that deals with and addresses primarily unwanted speech, making it unintelligible. So that's the primary focus of sound masking.
And ultimately, when it comes to those three ABCs, the absorption, the blocking, the coverage, integrators and architects need to find ways to kind of balance those different elements during the design phase. Is that right?
There's no doubt about it. So, and there's a cost associated, with all three, with the absorptive element, the blocking element, and the coverage element. I would argue that sound masking is one of the more cost-effective options, but ultimately, the designers should be thinking in terms of combination of three to create an optimal acoustical experience for the occupants of the building.
You mentioned cost effectiveness as being a real benefit of sound masking. I'm curious if you want to dive even a little bit deeper into some of the benefits sound masking provides that absorption, that blocking maybe can't address on their own. They don't have the same level of benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, and it's probably helpful just to kind of give it, again, a little bit of background of what sound masking does. So what we're doing is again, as I said before, the primary focus is on addressing human speech and making unwanted speech unintelligible. And there are other side benefits, from sound masking. But what we're doing is, if you think about human speech, if you're in an occupied space and there's conversations taking place, that indirect speech usually is at a level of about 45 decibels. And so sound masking will be introduced as a background solution, raising that background sound to about 45 or 47 decibels, usually just above the indirect speech level. So what we're doing is we're making unwanted speech unintelligible. And so the benefit of that is the actual occupant, the worker that's focused on a project, is not distracted by conversations with their peers. They're focused on their work and they're not distracted. And ultimately that creates for a more comfortable environment. And quite honestly, as you could appreciate, a more productive environment for the employee and employer.
Absolutely. And that productivity is, of course, critical, both for the
Absolutely.
employee and the employer, as you say. When you think about modern construction materials, I'm thinking stuff like glass,
Sure.
steel, concrete. What are some of the challenges that those materials introduce when it comes to noise control? And you talk about the stakes in these various environments. You want to make sure people are productive. But what are some of those challenges those materials introduce?
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, so the introduction of glass and steel and hard surfaces in the interior space has been pretty commonplace over the years. And they're used for a lot of different reasons. And a big part of it is the aesthetics. And the designer is ultimately focused on aesthetics. But the problem with it is it adds to the issues of dealing with acoustics, because when you have hard surfaces, you have sound bouncing off that hard surfaces, which makes it hard to control and make it more comfortable. And so introducing sound masking will help with that situation. Again, by introducing a background sound to alleviate the noise associated with sound bouncing off of the hard surfaces, basically in layman's terms.
As I said at the outset, Lencore is, of course, kind of the de facto source when it comes to acoustic information. You really know your stuff. You're very well established in the industry, and you've therefore seen some of the transitions in acoustic needs over the years, over the decades. With the pandemic, we've seen these fluctuating occupancy levels ever since, even as more organizations return to the office. So, what are some of the need changes that you've observed as this environment shifts from hybrid work to return to office to balances between the two? How have acoustic needs changed as a result of all that?
Yeah, that's another good point. So we've seen a lot of concern with dealing with acoustics post-COVID. We're seeing a lot in the news today about people returning to work, employers, kind of mandating people return to work, at least from a hybrid perspective. And what happens when they do return to work, Dan, is, in a space that once occupied 100, employees, and they're now back to work from a hybrid perspective, and there's 20% occupancy. The space itself creates almost an eerily experience. You need to address the fact that there aren't as many people having conversations in the space. So sound masking can help with that by introducing that background sound. It makes the space more comfortable for the employee, and so they're not distracted, as we said. And the other thing that has been taken into consideration by the sound masking industry, Lencore very specifically, is understanding that there are going to be different occupancy levels, and therefore we're dealing with acoustically distinguishable scenarios that we need to address. And so sound masking manufacturers have added elements to the sound masking where it can be adjusted automatically based on occupancy level to make it more comfortable, whether it's 20% occupancy or 100% occupancy.
A really fascinating whole idea, Frank, because as you say, you certainly want to mask intrusive sounds that are going to be distracting, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. But if an office is not heavily occupied at all, it can almost be kind of eerie if there's just a silence in there.
Right.
So you want to have some background noise. So really, it can serve both purposes, as you say, both to avoid those intrusive sounds that are going to distract you in a crowded or noisy environment, but also to create some noise so you don't have an eerie silence surrounding you when you're trying to work.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about at what point in the construction, in the renovation, acoustic planning, including, of course, sound masking, should be introduced. I would imagine there are risks or there are missed opportunities when acoustics are not addressed early in the design process. Do you want to identify some of those risks, some of those missed opportunities when it's not addressed early enough?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to answer that is, we do the design of all our customers. Every project is custom designed by Lencore, and we see scenarios where sound masking may be, from a budgetary standpoint, dismissed for budgetary concerns, only for the customer to come back later and ask for sound masking to be redesigned. They want to add it to the space, basically from a day two scenario. What happens traditionally, not so much with the sound masking cost itself, the equipment cost, but labor is going to increase once you go from a new construction scenario to an occupancy scenario, when they have to come in and install the sound masking with occupants in the building, or because they're occupants, they have to work after hours or on weekends to accomplish the goal of adding the sound masking as a solution. And so we try to emphasize that with all customers, that your best opportunity for sound masking from a cost-effective standpoint is to do it from day one and not on day two.
Actually, you've kind of anticipated my next question here, which is that sound masking, at least historically, has been kind of perceived, I guess, as optional, as a nice to have, not really so much as a have to have. What it seems to me like you're doing is making a pretty persuasive case that it should be considered on every project and not be considered on day two as an optional add-on, but on day one as a have to have. Do you want to just put a little bit more meat on the bones and talk about why sound masking should not be optional, why it should be a consideration on every single project and every single project on day one?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. You're right. We are highly focused currently with our integrator customers, focused on having them work with us to create more awareness in the sound masking space. They recognize when we meet with our integrator customers, there's oftentimes the conversation lands on, yeah, sound masking continues to be considered a nice to have, and sometimes when there's a budgetary concern, it gets dismissed, and only for the customer to come back. And so we want to address that. We want to make sure that we're fully communicating to the end user that you really truly need to consider this as a necessity. You have occupants in the building that need to be more comfortable. You want them more productive, obviously, because there's an ROI associated with that. And so we're trying to create more awareness by asking our integrator partners to consider those projects that they know should have sound masking, but the customer's not asking for it. And so we've implemented programs and incentivized our integrator partners to do just that. Send us a quote. We do the quote for free. We turn it around in 24 hours, 95% of the time. So we're not going to hold up your quote for another solution for the end user. And when you're submitting the bid for that other solution, also submit sound masking. We'll help you from a marketing perspective, create the awareness, and we'll also send you a bill of material on the space that you're working on. And so we're doing our best to create the awareness that sound masking should not be considered day two. It's more expensive, and you're doing your occupants, you're doing your employees a disservice by not having it in day one, if that makes sense.
Does. And what I love about it, Frank, is you're not just identifying a problem or a challenge that people are not thinking about sound masking early enough that they're not prioritizing it appropriately. It's easy to point out a challenge. Sometimes it can be more difficult to identify the solution. But with your sound masking on every project incentive program, you are making it easier. You are providing that solution. So kudos to Lencore and you for, again, not just identifying what needs to be done, but creating a pathway for it to be done.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate that. And we're seeing a lot of success. There wasn't an integrator that we talked to that did not agree to participate. And so we fully expect that this initiative will help create more awareness and obviously more sound masking opportunities for Lencore and more satisfied customers at the end of the day.
Obviously, you know the audience you're speaking to very well, AV integrators, designers, people who are generating proposals. How does offering sound masking in their proposals position them to be more effective in your point of view? I think you've already hinted about some of this, but I'd love to just get a reiteration of some of the key reasons.
Yeah, I think the ultimate answer to that is, the integrator is now acting more as a consultant and not just a transactional partner for the end user. They're going to obviously give the end user what they're asking for, but they're also consulting in the fact that they're saying, look, you have a space that needs to have acoustics addressed. Sound masking is an excellent solution for your acoustical issues. Please at least, take the time to look at what that sound masking addition would mean for your organization, not just from a cost perspective, but also from a solution perspective. And so I think that's the ultimate goal. We're again creating awareness, and we're kind of helping our integrator partners become more of a consultant with their end users.
That is exactly the point the commercial integrator tries to drive issue after issue, day after day on our site, that it should really be a consultative relationship where you're standing shoulder to shoulder with your clients and effectuating the outcomes that they want. So I think you're really kind of empowering your integrator partners to do that. And certainly you're a strong advocate and expositor of that. I'm interested in just a little bit more detail on some of the feedback you're hearing from integrators, from clients who are using these proposal inserts and these incentives times. My guess is it's probably been very, very laudatory and very positive. But anything you want to share anecdotally or just in aggregate?
Yeah, I think anecdotally, it's funny. I was visiting a customer just 2 weeks ago, and introducing the program to them. And the customer, as I'm speaking and talking about the benefits of the program and the elements of the program, he was kind of smiling, and he finally stopped me and said, "Frank, I love what you're introducing, but I'm going to tell you, I've been doing it for years. The concept for me makes a lot of sense. I have closed." Probably 30% was the comment. 30% of what I introduced, even though it's not being asked from a sound masking perspective, closes as an opportunity for me as an integrator. So I get kudos to your efforts, but we're already doing it. And so I thought that was some nice feedback from a very loyal customer. That's a big part of why he does so much Lencore sound masking, because he introduces it on every project that he thinks looks like it should have sound masking associated.
It's wonderful feedback to hear, and it must have been very affirming to have heard it. As I've
Yes.
said many times, Lencore is really the go-to resource as far as I'm concerned for acoustics-related knowledge. So I just want to ask kind of an open-ended question. What do you wish architects, designers, building owners, what do you think wish that they better understood about acoustics? If you could share one bit of knowledge or factual context, what do you wish they would absorb?
Well, that's
No
a
pun
great
intended
question
about
because
absorption.
yeah, it's probably our biggest problem is awareness. We talked about it a little bit, and I'm not talking Lencore. I'm talking sound masking as an industry. We've kind of run the numbers. If you take a look at our core verticals and what their forecasted construction spend is on every given year, and then what the sound masking industry, total dollar value, total revenue looks like, there's some quick math that can basically come to the conclusion that sound masking has only penetrated a very small percentage of the addressable market. There's a lot of opportunity out there. And so if we can create that awareness with those key constituents, those decision makers that are either giving the thumbs up or not to sound masking, the industry will be in a much better place. Sound masking from our perspective has penetrated, a little less than 10% of the addressable market. So there's tremendous upside by creating that awareness factor.
So, Frank, I want to kind of close the conversation where we began it. We talked about acoustics being critical, but often overlooked. So, anyone who's listening to this conversation, who may be designing a new space or renovating an old space, what is the very first step you think they should take toward getting better acoustics? How are you going to help them not overlook this critical element?
Yeah, I think it's really simple. Do your homework, and feel free to reach out to Lencore. We do our quotes on a very rapid, consistent basis. We do not charge for our quotes. At the very least, if you have a project where you're considering dealing with your acoustical issues, sound masking is a solution, and we're here to help. We're happy to provide you with the information you need to make an informed decision. We do the design, we do the complete layout, very professional design and layout, and we incorporate a bill of materials so there's no sticker shock. You know what you're getting, and I think you'd be very pleased with the outcome. Quite honestly, as I said before, sound masking as part of the ABCs is probably less expensive than the other elements associated with addressing acoustical distractions. And so would love to see more people take advantage of the opportunity, quite honestly.
This would I, and thank you so much for a really informative conversation about the ABCs, literally and metaphorically of acoustics and everything Lencore can do to help our integrator readers. I guess my last question, my journalism 101 question
Sure.
is there anything I've forgotten to ask that you would like to add that you have not had an opportunity yet to share with our audience?
No, I appreciate all the questions. Very good questions. The one thing I will say, I mentioned verticals, so as you would guess, and the audience would guess, corporate office space is our primary core vertical. And I would say that's probably true of our competitors as well. Corporate office space is our biggest vertical, but we're seeing a huge uptick in healthcare, a huge uptick in government work, and we feel there's opportunities in other verticals as well. We'd like to be able to explore that at some point in time. Hospitality comes to mind. Anyway, sound masking is an awesome solution to a real problem, and we truly appreciate this opportunity, Dan, to get our voice out there into the marketplace.
We're delighted to provide the opportunity. I feel like I really learned a lot, and I'm sure that our integrator audience did as well. The most important, of course, being that acoustics and sound masking need to be thought of on day one, on every project, not on day two, not as a nice to have or as an
Right.
afterthought, but as a foundational element of what you are doing. So thank you so much, Frank McCormack, who is Vice President of Sales with Lencore, for joining me today for what has truly been a very illuminating conversation. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Dan. It's been my pleasure. I truly appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. Please do keep your eyes on commercialintegrator.com in the days, weeks, and months ahead for more exciting and interesting thought leadership content like this that will help you run a better business and that will help you effectuate better outcomes for your clients. We'll see you again soon.